Welcome everyone to Ymedia Foreign Policy, and we have our co-host Ramona ji. Will be talking about lots of issues today. Is this war going to escalate, or the war can end? Uh, President Trump, on one day he said, he was threatening Iran with so many different things. The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, has said we are ready for action anytime we are given the orders. Our army is ready. But President Trump also mentioned the war could end in 2 days. So that time has arrived when he said the war could end in a couple of days. So is the war going to end, or we think the war can escalate? Pakistan is trying its best to do the mediation. Pakistan's Army General Asim Munir, went to Iran. The news that we are getting is that yes, there are some positive signals as far as the discussions are on between this backdoor diplomacy between Iran and US. So will there be another rounds of talks? We'll discuss that as well. And also we will be discussing whose side is Pakistan on. Is Pakistan on the US side, or is Pakistan on the Iranian side? Pakistan has deployed its troops right there at the Abdulaziz Air Base where Iran is attacking. So the numbers are varying, 12,000 or 13,000, but that's the number of troops, thousands of Pakistani troops deployed there. And Pakistan has also sent fighter jets. They have a defense pact. Last year they did in September, they did a defense agreement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. And there is some economic aspect also in play. So we'll discuss that as well. Israel and Lebanon, some sort of ceasefire is being announced, and Lebanon's leaders are thanking President Trump. So he loves that. They're thanking President Trump for the talks between Israel and Lebanon. So after many decades this has happened, but it's a fragile ceasefire there as well. My apologies for using that word again. I use this word for fragile peace ceasefire between Iran and US as well, but I'm using the same there. Why? Because we're still seeing visuals of Israel attacking areas in southern Lebanon. We just confirmed the visuals of a hospital being attacked in Lebanon. So we'll talk all about this. Where does Europe stand among all this war situation? What has Canada to say? Is China doing anything? Is India playing any role, or Russia actively engaging in any sort of discussions? So, but before we do all that, Ramona ji, what is the latest? What are your thoughts? What's your take right now regarding the war? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's good news that we're hearing that Israel and Lebanon have agreed to a 10-day ceasefire starting tonight, which will be at 9100 GMT. This is good news because of the devastation we've seen. So I guess, what we're seeing happen in southern Lebanon with the Israeli forces, they have until that time period to do what they need to do. It's unfortunate what we've seen come out. We've had thousands of lives lost, 4,000 roughly during this conflict that's started 48 days ago. And so we can go through what's really happened in the last 48 days. We know that the talks between the United States and Iran failed in Islamabad, not closing it completely, but essentially not coming to terms with what was being asked for on both sides. Essentially, now we're hearing more reports about what those negotiation factors were that took place in Islamabad over the weekend. Essentially, the delegation led by Vice President J.D. Vance was there in negotiations with the Iranian delegation, and some of the things he announced were new items than what was in the 10-point proposal by Iran. So if you recall, back on April 7th, when the ceasefire for 2 weeks was agreed on between Iran and United States by President Trump, essentially those 10 points for ending the war that was proposed by Iran, some of them included reparations. The ceasefire should also include Lebanon, control over the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's ability to have nuclear power, and so on and forth. Those were the items, and lifting sanctions, very high level key things that Iran had asked for. And President Trump in his Truth Social post said that those are things that could be negotiated on, things that he could consider, sounding fairly positive around those 10 points. But obviously there's a lot of speculation that, would the US ever really look at those 10 points and agree to any of them. So when Vice President J.D. Vance, who had been virtually MIA during the entire war, started leading the first sit-down talks, while we saw Marco Rubio and President Trump at a UFC fight in Miami. So essentially, they were doing their thing while the vice president was having those serious talks that took place for 21 hours, as he says. Essentially, there it was the red lines were about Iran not just enriching uranium for civilian purposes, which it was agreed to in previous agreements. It was no enrichment for 20 years. And then Iran came back and said, okay, how about 3 to 5 years? And so that was one of the main sticking points. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz in terms of organizing its control over it, which Iran previously didn't have before this war started. And so then to that, when they didn't reach an agreement, fast forward to the Monday, and President Trump deployed U.S. naval ships to the Strait of Hormuz. And today we're hearing more about what is happening there. It's essentially to the Iranian ports to make sure that it prevents it from making its own shipments, in a way to have pressure for the second rounds of meetings, which we know that Pakistan is actively in Iran right now, going over some of those items to make sure that the U.S. and Iran meet again. The good news is, prior to the meetings that would take place, I guess Israel and Lebanon ceasefire is a bonus before the talks that would happen for the second time between the United States and Iran. There is no date set just yet, but that could be announced anytime, like how we're seeing this is, a moving situation. So it could be announced today, hopefully, and we'll have more details on that.
Yeah. And once again, we'd like to tell you that, yes, there are lots of discussions, and right now we will carry on the latest situations that are happening in different areas. So why don't we start with this one, that what do we think that the war between Iran and US will attend Pakistan? I'm showing you visuals as well. In these visuals, you can see Pakistan General Asim Munir. He goes to Iran, and he's started some discussions over there, and they're trying for a second round of discussions. So here is General Asim Munir, welcomed by the Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister Sayyid Abbas Araghchi, and in his military uniform, you can see he's holding a stick and his uniform. The gentleman right behind him is their Interior Minister, so Mohsin Naqvi. So that's their Interior Minister. He's also head of their Pakistan Cricket Board as well, Mohsin Naqvi, and he was right behind the Army General. Now, Pakistan on one side, they're going to Iran, and they're, so if I can show this on full screen for you, and once again, you see the body language. The body language, it seems great. Pakistan's Army General has been welcomed by none other than the Foreign Minister. So when the Foreign Ministers are usually, I'm not saying all the time, but they are usually sent to the airport to welcome state heads or President or Prime Minister. But it's only the Interior Minister, Mohsin Naqvi, and mainly General Asim Munir. Of course, General Asim Munir, he's in charge of Pakistan right now. They're a democratically elected Prime Minister. He's in Saudi Arabia. So now, the point that I want to discuss over here is Pakistan really on Iran's side, the Muslim brother Muslim country? They're also talking about forming a Muslim bloc as well. There are discussions now. Pakistan and Iran are talking about that. Pakistan and Iran are talking, let's form a Muslim bloc. Will that happen or not? We'll talk about that as well. But when talks were held in Islamabad, we told you at that time there were thousands of troops sent to Saudi Arabia. And the recent news is that Saudi Arabia has approved a $3 billion loan. Mohammad Aurangzeb, Pakistan Finance Minister, announced that in US, they are there to, not only they're meeting the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent over there, but Pakistan is also there because IMF, they had to take loans from IMF. So this is not just merely a military war, but this is also an economic war. And I'll let Ramona ji talk more about that later on when Strait of Hormuz, what is the blockade happening, what's happening. But this is also an economic activity in play over here. This is an economic war as well. But for Pakistan, because UAE demanded their $3 billion back, and they also had to pay back around $1.2 billion to Eurobonds as well. So here is a bit of a relief from Saudi Arabia. So Pakistan is indebted to Saudi Arabia. They already have $5 billion. They already have $5 billion. And Saudi Arabia said, okay, fine, those 5-6 billion, whatever we have, let it stay over there for another 5 years. So they don't have to go to Saudi Arabia now and ask every year that if we can roll it for another year. So, okay, they've given him some time over there. Another further loan of around $3 billion by Saudi Arabia and the Defense Pact. So now this begs the question that on that very airbase, Iran has been attacking the US military on that very airbase. Now Pakistan forces have come. Pakistan's fighter jets have been stationed at that very airbase in Saudi Arabia. So, and Saudi Arabia definitely wants Pakistan to lead from the front. And here is Pakistan mediating talks, and Pakistan's General Asim Munir visiting Iran, and Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, he simultaneously, he is visiting Saudi Arabia. He met Mohammed bin Salman over there, and he is finalizing that deal. That okay, fine. The deal was announced in US by the finance minister, but that would, we already told you that is the deal that's happening. Now it has been confirmed yesterday when Pakistan finance minister announced that. So here is my analysis, and I'll let Ramona ji also respond to that and other things. My analysis is simple. We've been talking, both Ramona ji and myself, that US needed an off-ramp. US needed an off-ramp, and who better than Pakistan? Send Pakistan's general, initially they initiated the talks. Iran is also under fire. Iran, as much as they're regrouping, they're once again making sure their factory of missiles and drones, everything starts working again. But Iran has also suffered heavy losses, not only to the infrastructure, to their military infrastructure, to their civilian infrastructure, but also they've lost a lot of leadership. And of course, there are human casualties as well. So Iran is also saying, okay, as much as we're on the driver's seat, especially with the control of Strait of Hormuz, but there's no harm in listening to what US has to offer. In case they start getting concessions, instead, the nuclear enrichment that they're doing for uranium. So uranium enrichment is about 60% right now. I remember in 2015 when the deal was done, Russia took that uranium. Maybe they'll give that uranium to Pakistan for a peaceful purpose, whatever they have. And maybe they agree that, okay, fine, we will not enrich too much of uranium, but we'll only use it for a peaceful purpose. That's what they're claiming right now. They get some sanctions off. Their money that has been sanctioned, that could be released. So I'm sure Iran must be looking for a lot of sanctions. Of course, they want to keep the control of Strait of Hormuz. So I think both the parties want that. Iran realizes this, that Pakistan has been dispatched, especially General Asim Munir has been dispatched by US, that these are a list of demands. Please get us a favorable deal. Here it is. Please get us a favorable deal from Iran as soon as possible. So you can call him a diplomat from, General Asim Munir is a diplomat from US, or as a mediator from US, but Iran is welcoming all this because Iran clearly realizes China doesn't want to mediate. China is supporting Iran very openly with its logistic support. Russia is supporting Iran. India, on the other hand, they have now started buying oil from Iran. They are sending medical supplies to Iran. And as much as India is one country, I'll talk about India who could have done something, but I'll talk about why India, China and Russia, they're not doing as much as they could do. But Pakistan, they desperately need money from IMF, from Saudi Arabia. And of course, many of the analysts in Pakistan, they're clearly saying this, we'll have to take a cost-benefit analysis, a call on the basis of cost-benefit analysis. If push comes to shove, if Saudi Arabia and Iran really want us to take one side, and everybody knows they're going to take Saudi Arabia side. Iran doesn't have much to offer to Pakistan. So they're clearly saying this, their senior leaders an analyst. We're going to take a call on the basis of cost benefit analysis. And yeah, Ramona ji, please go ahead.
I think what Pakistan is doing right now is definitely a master class in diplomacy that I think all the nations should take notes on. Does not matter because of this economic situation they're in. Yeah, that's a small factor, but really at the end of the day, what they have stepped up to do, which every other country has failed to show up to do, and we're talking about countries that possibly, were probably closer allies to the United States or maybe allies, with some of those key factors. But what has positioned Pakistan very significantly in all of this is because of its regional relationships. It shares a border with Iran. It had a clear channel to Iran. It has, of course, the deal with Saudi Arabia and relations with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, all those are important. And of course, its relationship with Russia, as well as China and the United States. So aside from its own economic challenges, what they're able to pull off here in terms of, being able to have direct access to the president of the United States, positioning their military and sending fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, but also still getting that warm reception that you saw in that video from Iran, knowing what's at stake. This is a master class in diplomacy. And the world that we live in today, we need more foreign affairs ministers or secretary of state, or people in key positions that decide to run for elections and decide they want to put up their hands to be politicians. And then they get the vote of the people, which is the trust of the people, to put them in those key positions. They need to learn from what Pakistan is doing right now, because had Pakistan not stepped up the way they are today, then we wouldn't have a ceasefire the way we had. The casualty numbers were increasing. We know this war was not escalating because both sides were not backing down in any capacity. Trump wasn't backing down, and Iran was not backing down, and Israel was doing what it wanted to do in Lebanon. So you had three world leaders, Israel, United States, and Iran, essentially seeking their own means while the entire global economy was being held at hostage. And more specifically, the GCC countries, when they were being attacked, it affected everywhere else. The latest number is that in 6 weeks, Europe could run out of fuel. That means flight cancellations. That means massive things that would be taking place. We're talking about famine that could go on for years. So the fallout on this, on a global scale, yes, there's casualties, and our thoughts and prayers go out to those people. And then there is the secondary level of casualties of famine, and then the third and the fourth, and on that, which affects, of course, the global economy and the affordability crisis that everyone has been going under. So what Pakistan today is doing, and the question, whose side are they on? At the end of the day, I think firstly, they're on their own side because this is critical. And then secondly, I think they're on the side of all of us to be able to go into these negotiations that are not easy because both sides are not conceding. And here's the thing, if we do get the second round of talks, then and we're able to come to some sort of terms from the 10 points. Sorry, let me backtrack. From the 45-day ceasefire that President Trump had put forward to say, then we'll look at things, to the 10 points that Iran put forward for a 2-week ceasefire, and then what didn't go as planned in that 21 hours. For them to come back at the table, and for Iran, some of those things is, perhaps give your enriched uranium to a third party. Maybe that would be Pakistan, not sure. Iran agreeing to not enriching its uranium for 3 to 5 years, less than the 20 years that the US is asking for. And that's the other thing. The goalpost was changed so many times. Like, you have to look at it this way, right? Iran is at the table with the United States, having talks in Oman, coming to an agreement, and then you had Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, and I think it's borderline treason to go tell the president that let's go to war when it was unnecessary, because it's been proven that Iran was not an imminent threat to the United States. It's been proven that Iran does not have nuclear weapons, and that's those are the two things that, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff said, and we've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister talk about those two things. So essentially, a war was triggered not on the basis of the things that they were told, that they had told the president. This war got triggered. Lebanon has been affected as a result, and perhaps Lebanon was always part of the plan, according to Israel's prime minister. I'm not sure, but obviously you're seeing what's taken place there. And then you're looking at the goalpost of regime change. And then President Trump even went on the record on Easter saying we sent guns to Iran when there was protests. So before the war started, there was, U.S. interference with sending weapons. And then he said that the parties they sent the weapons to withheld the weapons. And then, these are things you usually don't say. Those are probably classified things. And this president talks about things openly, which is good for us, the public. But when you start with a regime change, then let's remove the enriched uranium stockpile. And perhaps that was part of what happened with those U.S. fighter jets that were shot down. Again, President Trump said, who leaked the story? Because it was supposed to be a mission that no one was supposed to know about. And then Israel came forward and said, no, we leaked the story. So then you had all of that. Then President Trump, his rhetoric on, this is power plant bridge day, civilization is going to cease to exist, and that level of, threats from a president. And then, of course, coming to a ceasefire, because knowing really his back is against the wall. Is he really going to bomb a power plant where he sees, all those Iranians standing around their power plants, all those Iranians standing on their bridges? Is he really going to do that? And when he backed off the ledge of his threats, this is being President Trump, saying, okay, we'll take a look at those 10 points. When JD Vance was sent, Iran was still under the assumption that those 10 points, which they put forward for the ceasefire, were going to be what was going to be discussions. Then again, during those conversations, the goalpost again changed from, Iran should have a nuclear weapon to Iran should not even enrich its uranium, not even for civilian purposes, for 20 years. And Israeli Prime Minister said that he was on a call with United States Vice President J.D. Vance, using the word reporting to me. They report to me is what the Prime Minister of Israel has said. So we know that J.D. Vance didn't go there with the ability to negotiate. He went there, and walking out 10, 20 times, according to reports, calling President Trump and calling, Israel's Prime Minister to really negotiate and going more hardline on some of those things. So perhaps, these are things that were a surprise in that meeting, and that's why they could not come to terms after, 21 hours. So what Pakistan has been able to do with the goalposts changing, and of course you're hearing President Trump say, we're going to reach a deal in any day now. And then you have, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth talking about destroying Iran. So you have the mixed messaging that's coming out of the White House, and Pakistan is having to be in the middle of all of that to be able to talk to all its allies, such as Saudi Arabia, and of course now in this case Iran, and try to find somewhere where, because there's the trust deficit, it is a shaky, fragile ceasefire. But guess what? It's been holding. Iran and the United States have not attacked each other. And on top of that, even though the American vessels have gone and blocked the ports of Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran retaliated by bombing, attacking its, the GCC nations' ports. It hasn't done it. Iran has again said it's going to close other waterways like the Red Sea, has yet to do it. And perhaps it's because you have Pakistan actively talking with Iran on the ground, face to face. So, very critical part Pakistan is playing. This is a masterclass that I believe every country should take note on how to be able to manage all of these conflicting relationships with each other, and being that middle power to be able to bring people to terms and to still hold the ceasefire. And now the good news that there will be a 10-day ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, which is of course a very good news, because that was part of the sticking point of going into negotiations. That's another thing. before going into that negotiations in Islamabad, well, Iran was saying, hey, the part of the 10 points was that Israel should stop bombing and stop occupying southern Lebanon. Israel just escalated their attacks in Lebanon, and then the White House said, no, Israel's not on the 10 points. But yet Pakistan again said, you know what? We know Lebanon issue is an issue that it was part of the ceasefire. Let's put that aside and let's talk about the nuclear aspect of it right now. So even in that leadership, to be able to separate the two things, let's talk about the Iran nuclear issue and keep the Israel-Lebanon issue aside until we can meet some sort of terms. And so all critical things that I think we all need to be very thankful of that we're here today talking about, what could be, we're in a ceasefire and what could be the end of this war versus, the level of conversation we're having before this ceasefire that was escalating on a daily basis.
Yeah, and as you were just mentioning, we've discussed this a lot regarding the Lebanon and, Israel. So as much as Trump has announced that, let me tell you for our viewers' benefit, once again that President Trump announced that there's going to be a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel. Israel definitely wanted to continue this war, and when the ceasefire was announced earlier, Israel clearly emphasized that the ceasefire doesn't include, at that time, when the initial ceasefire was announced between US and Iran and Israel, so Israel said that ceasefire does not include Lebanon. They clearly wanted to emphasize that again and again. And US President Trump also said, yes, that ceasefire does not include Lebanon. Because Israel wanted, they have around 5 military divisions in southern Lebanon. They wanted to carry on the operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And they didn't want their forces to leave, no ceasefire at all. They wanted to carry on because they thought they had the momentum on their side. Now, Iran said that no, the ceasefire should include ceasefire in Lebanon because Iran has, Lebanon is a proxy front of Iran. So Hezbollah is a proxy front of Iran. So Iran definitely wanted that there should be ceasefire. But now I think, if I'm reading it correctly, I think US or President Trump somehow conveyed or convinced Israel that Lebanon has to be included in a ceasefire. Of course, they've had talks facilitated by US, and this was much needed PR for President Trump. And the Lebanese leadership also praised Trump that thank you for, hosting the talks, thank you for facilitating, mediating all these discussions, thank you for the ceasefire. So much needed praise or PR support from the Lebanese leadership. Israel has, for now, reluctantly agreed to do this. I'll also make one point more, but this does not mean that, this discussion will always be on. There are many questions still unanswered as far as Israel-US relationship is concerned. How much leverage does have Israel on US or US on Israel? After this war ends, the dust settles down, what will be the relationship between Israel and US? There's lots of discussion. On one end, there's discussion, Israel, the relationship is very strong, it will still carry on. Of course, there is another narrative being built that they will question, why did we get into this war? And it's no secret that Benjamin Netanyahu and Jared Kushner, they had close relationship. Whenever Benjamin Netanyahu would come to New York, he would stay at their home, even Jared Kushner's room as well. So they have very strong relationship. And the interesting part is that Jared Kushner has also very strong relationship with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince. And whether it was the Abraham Accords that was initiated, UAE, Bahrain, they've had all sorts of business relationship with Israel. But definitely Jared Kushner and Trump, Saudi Arabia and Israel, they were facilitating that business relationship as well. So even now at the Miami summit, where Saudi Arabia was the main country over there, at the Miami summit, Saudi Arabia's leadership was there, Mohammed bin Salman was there, the business leaders were there, and President Trump, he didn't mince his word. He clearly said it's time for Abraham Accords once again to get back on that, and Saudi Arabia and Israeli relationship should be stronger than ever. And Jared Kushner, I think he's a very important link. Steve Witkoff is a very important link, but having good relationship with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. The one key person other than Steve Witkoff or President Trump, it is Jared Kushner as well. Ramona ji, your take on all this?
Yeah, those are facts about Jared Kushner's close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. That's definitely the case. Reports that yes, when Benjamin Netanyahu visited the Kushners' household, he did sleep in Jared's bed without Jared being in it, of course. But that's how the close relationship has been growing up, knowing these leaders. But that's why I keep bringing up the critical aspect of Jared Kushner giving this advice to his father-in-law, President Trump, to say, Israel's going to attack and we should join them as well. Because, our people Americans would be under imminent threat. And, and that's what really started this war. Meanwhile, Oman was saying, hey, we're hosting these talks. We're going to get to an agreement. And if you recall, prior to, February 28th, Strait of Hormuz was open. That wasn't a thing. Like, no country had control over the Strait of Hormuz like what we're seeing today. Iran taking control now, the US naval ships coming to take control. That wasn't a thing, right? And this global oil supply disruptions wasn't the case. When it comes to fertilizer, was not the case. So many different things was not the case. And definitely we saw what happened, right? It's the two countries strike Iran on February 28th, killing the Ayatollah, high regime leaders. And then after that, Israel started its occupation in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah attacked, but that was a calculation that you knew would have happened. You killed the Ayatollah, which is the supreme leader of Shia Islam, not just Iran. There was going to be retaliation. And here's the other part. There still is going to be retaliation. That's the scary part when it comes to world security. Right now we're talking about a war, and if, hopefully there's a ceasefire leads to an agreement, there's still going to be retaliation for what happened to the Ayatollah. And that's the reality of how things are. And I know it sounds horrible, but, that was part of the calculation. And so, with everything that's happened, you have to look at, what the agenda was and who really knew what the end game is, because it seems like President Trump seemed to not know what the end game is, saying, I listened to Jared Kushner, he said it. He goes, and then he goes, we want a regime change. Oh, okay, sorry, there's no regime change. Oh, we want the uranium. Oh, we cannot get the uranium because we sent fighter jets that got shot down and we couldn't get the uranium. Okay, what's next? Oh, the Strait of Hormuz must be open. And then saying to Europe, saying, hey, you need the oil, you guys handle it. Then, throwing NATO under the bus throughout all that, because NATO saying we're a defense ally. You guys started the war. We can't join this war. And so you have all of that level of escalation that now has massive fallouts, because even though this ceasefire happened, with Israel's occupation in southern Lebanon, now you have the fallout of Israel's relationship with many other key countries, right? We know there's many countries that support Israel when it comes to their army. And now Italy has suspended its defense agreement with Israel because there's been backlash for what comes for Italy's prime minister, essentially backlash saying, hey, why aren't you doing anything? Why are we still supporting Israel? You have South Korea, right? You have the leader of South Korea go onto his X page and, say, why is Israel calling themselves, a military, that is kind and with humanitarian values, showing really a video of Israeli IDF soldiers throwing, a young person off a building. And this is South Korea posting it on their X, right? And so you're already seeing a massive shift of the relationship Israel has with other nations. And then you're seeing MAGA, which is the Make America Great Again movement under Donald Trump. Essentially, that movement was there. He tapped into Americans who were just not happy with the state of affairs when it came to Washington, D.C. And you had the fracture of the MAGA movement under him, right? Whether it's key influencers that supported him, that helped him get elected. And then it's just, the fallback, the fallout has been really significant for President Trump's favorability alone. And then you have that for Israel and its own relationship with other nations. And we've had even Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney saying that Lebanon should be part of the ceasefires. You had other countries step in and say that. And at the same time, you had the strain happen between Britain and the United States. If you recall last year, they had a really warm relationship, Keir Starmer and President Trump, in the White House. They had a trade agreement. Essentially, now the King of England is being deployed to go make, the relationship a little, in using what he calls soft power. So our prime minister uses middle power. The King of England, King Charles III, uses soft power to go and smooth over the relationships with the American counterparts, with President Trump at the end of this month for the 250-year celebration of United States independence. So you have all of these things happening all at the same time. What has it done? Well, it's now opened Iran's relationship to talk to South Korea directly, to Japan, to China, to be able to sell its oil, which was something that was not, really advised, with the United States meddling in the way. And then you have this whole thing that if President Trump says, fine, we don't want to deal with the Strait of Hormuz, we don't need the oil from there anyway. Well, then there's the fallout of, hey, there's American bases in the GCC countries, and essentially they were being attacked because of those American bases. What does that mean with the United States relationship with Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, and so on and forth? So, and then we already know that Qatar and Iran are already talking, and perhaps it's another thing that the GCC countries need to see, that, hey, maybe we need to talk to our neighbor and come to some agreement, as opposed to going through third parties in the Western hemisphere to deal with our Middle East issues. So there's a lot of movement, and even though we're going to have, hopefully, what will be a ceasefire to end of this war, then we're going to see the fallout of what is to come between all of the regions and the countries that before February 28th were perhaps, in on better terms.
Yeah, and before we sum up, I think I just want to highlight this once again, that yes, Pope Leo and President Trump, they have been making some statements, and I'll first of all highlight Pope Leo once again. Pope Leo is mentioning that yes, do not use religion to support any sort of violence. That was the crux of his discussion. So Pope Leo has been advocating for peace, to stop the war, and President Trump, he's been questioning, he's been attacking Pope Leo recently. Also, there has been some war of words, if I may say that, and that has not gone very well. I think you were mentioning Italian Prime Minister Meloni earlier. I think she also wanted to untwine from President Trump, and I think she was looking at the opportunity, and I think she's got a perfect opportunity. As you were mentioning earlier, there are many Italians, who's supporting Pope in this case scenario, and some of them, they're saying no, we do not like Trump. So Meloni knew this thing, that being on the right side of Trump is not good for her domestically, and now she's chosen the side very clearly. She didn't appreciate what the way Trump mentioned about Pope Leo, and Pope Leo on his tour to Africa, before the tour, during the tour, he's been advocating for peace and clearly mentioning, do not initiate any wars, do not bring religion when you're talking about violence or wars. That's his message. Trump on the other side, he is attacking with his war of words. He's attacking Pope Leo. So this saga continues. Your final thoughts on this one, and then we'll take a short break, please.
Yeah, it's never seen before for a Pope to get this involved in current affairs, but look at where we are in the world. And so therefore the Pope did the right thing in terms of sending a message of peace. And to that, well, you had President Trump really attack him, talking to Pope Leo like he's a politician, saying he's weak on crime, and so many different things where Pope Leo is not a politician. He's not running for office. He's not creating legislation. He's not creating laws. So, just the way, and never seen before, of course, having an American president or any leader of any nation attacking the Pope, which is the supreme role in Catholicism. So that's unseen, but at the bottom line, there are both American, and in American fashion, they are speaking their minds to each other.